This week on High Performance, Sir Keir Starmer.
Being leader of the Labour Party or leader of the opposition is a bit like being the England manager, where everybody can do your job better than you. Everybody's got an opinion on your job that you should be doing. I wouldn't have played him at left back, or don't know what that's all about. I know what difficult decisions are, and I know they have to be taken. You cannot have a situation where you say, well, that's too difficult, I'm going to walk away from it. That isn't leadership. My mum was very, very ill all of her life, and she had this amazing courage. She would always get back up. Somehow she would get back up, get back to her feet. And so when I'm in that moment, there's a bit of me that thinks, if my mum can get up, I can get up. I didn't grow up thinking I would be, or particularly wanting to be an MP. It's not about Keir Starmer walking through the door at number 10. Push to one side what you can push to one side. Focus on what you're trying to achieve, and remember it isn't about you. Because when you're being subject to that kind of criticism, it feels very personal. I don't regret very much in life, but the last time I saw my dad, he was in hospital, dying. And I walked away. And I knew he was going to die. And I didn't turn around and go back and tell him what I thought. And I should have done.
Hey everyone, it's Jake here with just a big thank you to all of our new subscribers here on YouTube. And we've had some amazing comments as well. We had a really nice quote from Reese, who left a comment under the Ryan Mason upload recently. Ryan is the coach at Spurs Football Club. Brilliant episode. He said, you never truly know what people have been through in their lives. What an amazing guy. And Dell says, an inspirational, soulful, humble human. And that's the point of High Performance. We are giving you the truth behind the headlines so you can really get to know people. Hit subscribe, please, right now, because the more subscribers, the bigger the channel, the bigger the channel, the bigger the names. Well, Keir, welcome to High Performance.
Thank you very much.
Let's just be sort of really clear at the top what this is about. This is a conversation about a person, right? Yeah. Not a political conversation, no talk about policy, no point scoring, nothing like that. We're not in Westminster now.
This sounds very good.
This is just the truth, really, about who you are, where you've come from, and where you would one day love to be. Does that sound okay?
That sounds good.
Good. So to that end, I read an interview recently, actually, with your deputy, Angela Rayner, and she said she overshares, but Keir undershares. So, first of all, how do you feel having a conversation like this?
I'm getting used to it. It's the sort of thing that I felt very uncomfortable about, if I'm honest, a few years ago. I'm getting used to it. I do think it's really interesting to explore more where people come from. And, you know, I think some of the things that Angela said about oversharing and undersharing are just a fascinating insight into different personalities.
Why do you think you sort of struggled with it early on?
Because I've never spent my life sort of analysing what happened when I grew up, what I felt about it. I'm asked now much more about my mum and dad than I ever was in other jobs that I've done. And I've always been sort of very focused on an outcome. You know, what am I trying to achieve? Where's the goal? How do we get to that goal? Rather than having that conversation with myself about what does this all mean. And Angela, I think Angela was spot on, by the way. It was such an interesting observation. It was a very Angela observation. She's got brilliant sort of antennae about her oversharing and me undersharing and sort of holding quite a lot back inside me. And I think if you hold quite a lot back inside you, you don't particularly want to do podcasts like this.
Right. Well, we're going to delve deep today. Let's start the podcast with the way that we always do. In your mind, what is high performance?
I think high performance, for me, is about outcomes. It's about whether you can achieve that outcome, usually difficult outcomes, and that is high performance. I think it's probably changed over the years. I mean, I obviously came through being a lawyer, then ran a public service, now into politics. So it changes, but it's definitely outcomes focused for me. I mean, what I would say, just to qualify that, and it's not really a difference to what I think is important in terms of high performance. I think what I've learned along the road, as it were, is you can achieve the same things in different ways. So I think there's a point in our lives where we think the only way to achieve something is to behave in this way or to be focused in that way. The more I've seen people lead teams, the less convinced I am about that. I think you can achieve the same things in different ways, different styles. The other thing I'd say is I think high performance is different in different places. It depends what people are doing. My sister, for example, is a care worker. That's a high performance job in a completely different way. So for me, it's about outcomes. I think that reflects the job I'm doing rather than a fixed view on what high performance is.
So given the different roles that you've had in your career, Keir, from being a lawyer to leading a public service to now being the head of a political party, what are the changes that you've incorporated along those different roles that still allow you to get to those outcomes?
I think one of the biggest changes for me has been the scale. So to give you an example, when I started as a lawyer, I was a barrister, therefore an advocate. So you're pretty much on your own with quite a small team that you would put together for the purpose of a particular case. You'd be arguing a case on behalf of somebody. You'd probably have a team of maybe 3 or 4 people, totally focused on that case. The team only stayed together for the purpose of that case. It broke up afterwards because you go on to a different case. And so it's relatively small scale, very, very focused, only one outcome that matters, which is the particular case you're doing, nothing broader than that. I then moved on to sort of, if you like, strategic litigation, which is instead of doing each case one by one, can't we sort of tackle an issue in a bigger way and form bigger teams? But I'd say that there were 2 or 3 turning points, really important developments for me. The first was having gone from sort of individual cases to strategic cases. One of the strategic cases we did, for example, was challenging the death penalty in other countries around the world. But then I went to work in Northern Ireland on implementing some of the Good Friday Agreement proposals, which were, in my case, about changing the police, the RUC, the Ulster Constabulary in Northern Ireland, into the police service of Northern Ireland. So this was the idea that a different police service was going to emerge after the Good Friday Agreement that would be much more transparent, human rights compliant, etc. And up until that point in my life, I'd been the individual lawyer sort of railing against the system from the outside. And this was my first opportunity to work with the police and the policing board, changing from the inside. And that was a really insight. How do you affect change? A different kind of leadership altogether from the inside, because then you've got to get people on your side. You've got to influence them, change the way they think, and change, in that case, the nature of the police service in Northern Ireland. And then after that, I became Director of Public Prosecutions and headed up the Crown Prosecution Service. And I had 7,000 or 8,000 staff. Now, that's a big thing when you're used to having a team of 4 or 5. And suddenly I had to think, well, how do you influence someone on we had about 100 offices across England and Wales. How do I influence what somebody does the other side of the country? What are the leadership behaviours that have to change in order to do that? So I think there were big changes along the way. And
then obviously dive into what they are before we move to the next one.
Well, I think the first, which was working with the police service in Northern Ireland, is how do you operate in such a way that you can make sure that people have trust and confidence in what you're doing in such a way that they will want to change the organisation in which we're all working. That is a very different skill to arguing a case in court. And then this question of how do you affect change on us at scale, which was something which I hadn't done before. Were you bringing in the change, or were you trying to get them to suggest what the changes should be? What was the... A bit of both. So if you take the Crown Prosecution Service, I knew it had to change, and I wanted it to be much more open and transparent, and that when we were taking decisions, we would explain them. So to give you an example of what I mean by that, some of the most difficult decisions were in areas which were people had very strong and different views. So, for example, assisted suicide. One of the first cases that landed on my desk was a case of the mother of a person called Dan James. Dan was a fantastic rugby player, and he was up at Loughborough, and he was on the verge of getting into the England team when a scrum collapsed on him on a rainy Saturday afternoon, and he was very, very badly injured, paralysed from the neck down, and was at Stoke Mandeville for a while, but never recovered, and got more and more depressed, didn't want to live. And his mum would fight with him about that, as you can imagine. But in the end, he decided to take his own life by going to Dignitas, and his mum went with him. And when she got back, she was arrested for assisted suicide. And this came across my desk as Director of Public Prosecution, and I took the view that it wasn't in the public interest for her to be prosecuted for assisting in his suicide in the particular circumstances. But that, once I'd made that decision, I realised we had to go further than that, which was to open up the whole decision-making around assisted suicide to the public so people could have confidence in what we were doing. So I wanted to bring change. And amongst the change I wanted at the Crown Prosecution Service was that the more I felt strongly, the more we showed our workings, the more people have confidence in what we're doing. And therefore I was trying to bring about change. And learning how you do that across an organisation was really important to me. But it is a two-way process, because the other thing I learned at the Crown Prosecution Service, and it stayed with me, is if you really want to know how to fix the things in the organisation that aren't working, ask your staff and ask your junior staff. So we had these 100 or so offices across England and Wales, and I'd visit each of them quite regularly. At least once a year I'd try to get to, once every other year, so I'd do about 50 a year, go out to these offices. And whatever the programme was for the day, the first thing I'd do is say, can I just have 20 minutes on my own with the most junior staff with no supervisors in the room? And it was so insightful. And I asked them two questions routinely. The first was, what's the biggest problem, challenge that you've got every day you do your job? And what's the workaround? Because the staff will always find a way around a problem. And so brilliant ideas about how we reform. And the second, equally instructive, I thought, was, when's the last time your manager said thank you to you? And that was really revealing. You'd have some staff would say, look, my manager's actually quite good. They know exactly what I'm doing. They do come down every Friday and thank us. Someone would say, you know what? I can't remember. And then for some of them, they've really opened up to say, you know, the other day I was sort of working on this case. I was running up around the building. We just about got it done in time. And nobody noticed.
Brilliant.
And it was such an insight into how you manage people, how you lead people.
Well, that reminds us in our interviews that we've done here, we once sat down with James Timpson that runs the shoe repair shop business.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he talks about in his is that he does regular question and answer sessions with his staff, and the killer question he asks is would you let your child work here? Because he feels that gets to the heart of, is this culture acceptable? Because you could live with it, but if your child couldn't, we're doing something fundamentally wrong. What is it that you felt those two questions gave you as information as a leader of the CPS? Well,
the first question, which is what's the problem and how you're going to fix it, is a real insight into what's going wrong and what's the way. I'm a big believer in fixing things. Particularly now I'm in politics. What I can't stand is people who describe a problem very, very well. And there are lots of people who can do that. In politics, everybody does it all the time. Here's the problem. Here's the problem. You can have eloquent speeches about what the problem is. Yeah. And I want to know what's the solution? How do you fix this thing? I think we've all got an idea of what the problem is, but how are we actually going to fix it? What's the fix to this? It's in politics, it's the missing bit most of the time. And I got that from the staff, because they would, if there's something in the office isn't working properly and it's not working every day, in the end, you find a way to fix it. You find something, a way to work around the problem. And so there's what's the problem? How do we fix it? Was a really important part of my learning from that. The saying thank you was a real sense of how you value all members of the team. If you've got members of the team who are not even being thanked for the job they're doing, then you haven't got a very high-performing team, in my view, because in the end, if people don't feel that their contribution is, I was going to say respected, but even acknowledged, then the likelihood that they're going to, muck in and be high-performing is pretty low. So there's quite a lot to learn from that.
I'm really interested in the fact that, you clearly want to deeply understand people. You want to deeply understand problems. And you've also, I guess, realised that, things are nuanced. It's not this and that, black and white, A and B, right? Yet we live in a world where politics is totally not nuanced at all. It is more polarising than ever before. So with all of your sort of natural instinct from having impact and driving change, how do you feel about, the kind of school playground type Prime Minister's questions, or going on like political TV shows or news programs where it sometimes feels like the only aim for the journalist is to do a kind of gotcha, catch you out kind of moment, like how much is a pint of milk type questions.
Yeah.
How does the modern political world sit with your kind of deep desire to actually have genuine impact for the right reasons?
I really hate that side of politics.
Yeah.
And I think...
Do we have to have it?
Our system is set up as an adversarial system, if you like. Even the layout of the House of Commons, if you think about it, you've got it's a sort of rectangular shape. On one side, you've got all the benches of the government. On the other side, you've got all the benches of the opposition. So you're both staring at each other across a divide. And if you stand at the dispatch box speaking in Parliament, it is a very interesting experience. It's obvious once I've said it, but until I did it, I didn't quite appreciate it. You stand up. The moment you stand up at the dispatch box, almost every friendly face is now behind you. And you've got a wall of faces that are going to vehemently disagree with what you're saying. And it's a very, very tribal, divided way of doing things. There are other chambers, other parliaments around the world that are horseshoe-shaped to avoid that. But we've got a very adversarial, confrontational system. I have to say, coming in from outside of politics, I didn't come into politics till later in life when I'd done other things. I don't find it at all comfortable. I don't think it achieves very much. The best part of the week for me is when Prime Minister's Questions is over and I can get out of Parliament across the country. I was in Scotland earlier this week. That would be typical, to go straight out to see what is happening actually in the world outside of Parliament. Because my strong belief is, outside of politics, if there is a problem in an organisation, a team, something which you're leading, the instinct when something goes wrong or there's a problem to fix is to get people around the table and say, right, what's the problem? How do we fix it? What's people's views on this? And let's move forward. In politics, the instinct is to say, we've got all the answers, they've got none of the answers. Under us, everything be fine. Under them, everything's terrible. And I don't think it actually, is a good way of driving forward the sort of change that we need. It also leads to something which it leads to a sort of short-term thinking. So instead of recognising that some things are going to take quite a long time to fix, there's this sort of sense that you can do everything within a 5-year political cycle. And most of the time, the problems that we're actually confronting are going to take longer than that.
So when you're building teams now, I mean, it's different if someone's an MP because you don't decide who is or isn't. But when you're deciding who is in your shadow cabinet, who do you want to work closely with, but actually who are the non-MP members of staff that you're going to work with, who do you want to hire? What are the questions you ask? What are the things that you look for? Who do you want around you?
The people I want around me are people that can come to really sound judgments, and I can totally trust them, because obviously we're very busy, we've got a lot of things going on, and one of my weaknesses, I guess, is getting to that point where I can trust someone's judgment. So I think, members of my staff here can try it out on them later on, but I think that when I first start working with someone, it takes a while until I trust their judgment. And therefore, the relationship is one where I'm slightly questioning, well, what's that about? Just walk me through that. Tell me the thinking behind this. And I'm sort of testing it, which must be quite hard But once it gets to a point where I think this person knows what they're talking about, I trust their judgment, then it clicks into a much better place. So,
but you can't trust them on one interview or, you know, 1.5 hour conversation before you hire them. So what are the things you ask to kind of think that person's got eventually what you want from them?
So asking for an example of something they've done is always very good. Asking them what their detractors would say about them is always really, really interesting in terms of what people's real self awareness, and trying to find a sort of, I can't stand bullshitters, and trying to get to that point in an interview or get to that point quickly is really important for me. And I just can't stand people who sort of are bullshitting about something. You know, if there's a problem, let's know what it is. Let's have an honest conversation and get on with it. Even if you got something wrong, let's just find out what the problem is and get it solved. So what I'm looking for in that interview is the sort of seeds of the person who is not going to go down that rabbit hole, but is going to be in a position to take responsibility for their own decisions.
Can I try a Keir Starmer question out on you?
Yep.
What would your detractors say about you?
I think, firstly, they might say it takes too long to get to a position of trust with people. And I can see that's really irritating. Because if you are good at your job and you really do know what you're talking about, you probably don't want Keir Starmer questioning you the whole time and cross-examining you until he's got to the point of thinking, I now trust your judgment. I can see that is a weakness and an irritant. The other, I'm trying to avoid what a lot of people do, which is to say, oh, they'd say I was too hard working or something. You know, have people always turning around.
Yeah, you're
so humble.
My weakness is I'm so brilliant.
Yeah. I'm so modest.
I would actually go with Angela Rayner's observation of undersharing. I think she's right about that. And I think that sometimes that can lead to members of the team thinking you don't care enough. You're not showing enough emotion about this particular issue. Therefore, I, as a member of the team, am taking from this that somehow you don't care about it, which is completely wrong. And so her observation, I think, I've reflected on that quite a lot because I think she's probably right about that.
Yeah.
And
that's an interesting one because that's an observation from someone that actually knows you.
Yeah.
So I think even when they're wrong, I think we can be more accepting of observations from people who know us, care about us, and want the best for us. Where it gets really difficult is when the observations don't come from those people. They come from people with an agenda. And we know the way it works in this country with politics and opposition parties and the media and the public and social media and, you know, aggression online. And I'm not interested in the political angle to this. I'm really interested in the human angle to this. I wouldn't say you're an extrovert, right?
No.
So to put yourself out in the world like you do and to get the scrutiny and at times the criticism that you do, would you be happy to share with us actually how it really feels to be subjected to the scrutiny, the criticism, the polarized opinions, and I guess at times the sense of unfairness that perhaps all politicians on every party at times feel?
Yes, I do. And let's not make it party political because I think it is for politicians across the board. Because it's a funny old business. I mean, I often say to people, being leader of the Labour Party or leader of the opposition is a bit like sort of, I don't know, being the England manager where everybody can do your job better than you. Everybody's got an opinion on your job that you should be doing. I wouldn't have played him at left back or don't know what that's all about. And so my job is very much like this now. Everybody thinks they could do a better job and is, very happy to give advice on it. And there are ups and downs. When things are going well, that sort of goes down a bit, if I'm honest. And then when they're not going so well, the heat is really, really on. And it's really hard when you got lots of people saying pretty, negative stuff about what you're trying to do. And somehow you have to shut it out.
How?
I think for me, it's about, I'm giving this just almost like blinkering it. So being really clear, what am I trying to achieve? What is the goal? Let me just focus on that and push the rest of it out. It's hard to do. It's really, really hard to do. But I think if you didn't do it, you would just get dragged away and possibly not be able to do it. And then there's the sheer resilience of just getting back up and doing. When you're having a bad time, everybody's on you, and there's a lot of noises off. Just getting back up and doing it again can be really tough.
What's been the hardest moment in the journey so far? Where you've really thought, is this worth what I have to put myself through?
Since I've been leader of the Labour Party, it was in 2021 when we'd just lost Hartlepool badly. And that really hurt as a team. It was, I'd been leader for just over a year. Things were beginning to go in the right direction. And suddenly we had this major setback and it hurt. It was like being punched in the stomach. And it emotionally hurt, to be honest, because I was determined that we would pick the Labour Party up from where it landed in 2019 and turn it into a party that could serve the country and win an election. And suddenly we had this result in Hartlepool that sort of really brought us to our senses, and it hurt. And in retro, after the event, I now think it's good that it hurt. It didn't feel too good at the time, but you only hurt if you were so determined to have won.
Yeah.
But that was really hard, and we had 20 journalists and photographers outside our front door all of the time for days on end. And so it feels like you can't get away from it, even in your own home. You're sort of indoors, but the moment you step out, there's cameras, there's people, wanting to ask you questions. And, we've got relatively young kids. And that sense of there's nowhere to get away from this now, I think is really, I found it very hard. I think a lot of politicians would have found it hard. And how you just shut that out as best you can and plough on, even though, lots of people are being pretty disparaging.
And how do you do that? Like I'm thinking, like the way you described feeling like you've been punched. When we spoke to Tyson Fury on this podcast, he spoke around where his brain goes to when he's been hurt, and he thinks of all the occasions where he's been hurt in the past and how almost the evidence builds confidence that I can come back from this. How do you do it mentally to be able to keep going and keep forging ahead?
Firstly, I think I sort of go in on myself in almost a protective crouch. I absorb it into myself, and then begin the process of shutting out what I can shut out, reminding myself what it is I'm trying to achieve, and therefore that I've got to overcome this. There's a very important part for me as well, which is reminding myself that this is not about me, that what I'm trying to achieve is not about me. And it's always hard to get this over. I've tried several times before and it can be misconstrued. I didn't grow up thinking I would be, or particularly wanting to be an MP, because something in my head, I was a working class background. My dad worked in a factory, my mum was a nurse, and there was an inhibitor in there somewhere that was saying, this isn't a job that someone like you is going to do, Keir. And therefore, I didn't have this lifelong dream of being leader of the Labour Party or being Prime Minister. And therefore, I desperately want us to win the next general election, because I know what we can do if we do win that general election. But that is about having a Labour government which will change the country for the better for millions of people. It's not about Keir Starmer walking through the door number 10. And that, I don't know whether that makes any sense at all.
It does.
And therefore, this isn't so that one day there will be an image of me at number 10. It's because we need a Labour government. And I have to remind myself of that when I'm in that position to get out of it again, which is, right, take the heat, absorb it, put away what you push to one side, what you can push to one side, focus on what you're trying to achieve, and remember it isn't about you. Because when you're being subject to that kind of criticism, it feels very personal. And so it's that. And then something that works for me, different people will have different versions of this. But my mum was very, very ill all of her life, really ill. She had Still's disease, which is a disease that attacks your immune system when you're 11. And then she had steroids when she was a teenager, which helped with the Still's disease, but caused all sorts of awful problems later in life. So there came a point in which she couldn't walk. She couldn't properly use her hands. She had to have her leg amputated, and she was in and out of hospital a lot in very, very, very serious situations. So I've been in intensive care and high dependency units with my mum many, many, many times when it's been touch and go. And she had this amazing courage and determination. She would never moan. Even if you asked her in a sort of almost life and death situation, how are you? She'd always say, I'm all right, how are you? And she would always get back up. Somehow she would get back up and get back to her feet in the most impossible circumstances, where sometimes when I looked at her in the high dependency unit, I couldn't see how she could ever get up again. And interestingly, towards the end of her life, when she couldn't get back up again, it in the end, it destroyed her. And so when I'm in that moment, there's a bit of me that thinks if my mum can get up, I can get up. And whatever the criticism, that's not the same as a life and death situation where my mum got back up. And so there's a long answer to a question, which is there are complicated things that I think happen that give you a sort of resilience to get through a difficult set of circumstances. And you know, most of the time they're the very low moments in politics. There are many other times when it's simply not that bad, but they're the lowest. And the additional factor now is we've got children, and how do I protect them through this is something I do worry about.
Can we explore the relationship with your mum, though? Because as you're describing what sounds like a pretty harrowing and troubling experience of being in those high dependency units, I'm reminded of, I remember reading many years ago, Jeremy Paxman wrote a book about our prime ministers, and one of the trends that he spotted about them was that many of them had experienced childhood difficulties. Some had lost parents at a young age. Some had parents that had maybe had illnesses like yours. And I think one of our favourite quotes on here is the ghost of your childhood that still rattles around your adult body. Those experiences form you. They form your views, your beliefs, your judgments. What did that do for you, seeing your mum struggle like that?
The first thing is, I agree with you that those things do influence how you are. If I'm honest with myself, I've only come latterly to understand quite how they've influenced me. And I think to some extent I'm still coming to terms with how they've influenced me. So, and I speak about my mum and my dad here. My mum, as I've described, very ill, but incredibly sort of courageous and determined, warm, loving, and always there for others, not moaning about herself, was an incredible example. And that's given me a determination like nothing on earth. I mean, I'm just, you know, nothing will get in the way of what we have to achieve, you know, being absolutely clear-eyed and focused on what is it for my mum, which was, I'm going to get through this situation. I'm going to get up, and for her, it's, I'm going to walk again. I'm going to walk again.
Where do you think her incredible strength came from?
It was deep, deep, deep in her in her being, this sense that I think it was probably, although I don't know, being told as an 11-year-old or just past 11, she was told, by the time you're 20, you won't walk and you definitely won't have kids. And I've never talked this through with her, and obviously I can't now, but I've just imagined that it triggered something in her, that something in her, no way. And then it kept, and the steroids actually, because but for the steroids, she probably wouldn't have been walking, and I'm not sure whether she would have had kids, but it gave her that opportunity. And so that really, drove her. Because my mum was so dependent physically on help, the relationship between her and my dad was very intense. He was an incredible man. He was totally devoted and committed to her. Learned everything about every aspect of her illness. When she was in hospital, he would be there the whole time. He would, sleep on any bench in the corridor of the hospital or whatever. He wouldn't leave the hospital until she was coming home. Incredibly dedicated, and everything was premised on mum and how we'd get mum through. And these are things I'm thinking through more now, to be honest, because I've reflected a lot on my relationship with my dad in recent years, more than I probably did in the previous 20 years before that, and not so much when he was alive. Gave me this incredible sense of duty and loyalty, because his duty was to look after my mum. It was like the vow he took when he got married was just seared through him. It was his duty to do it, to be there, to absolutely be there. And he kept her alive on a number of occasions because he knew exactly what was going on and what exactly to do. So that duty, commitment, I think, and again, I'm piecing this together. I'm not pretending to be an expert on this, but that thing that Angela said about undersharing, where did that come from? A bit of me thinks it was because the intensity of that relationship about my mum's illness was such that there wasn't much emotional space for much else in our household. It was quite a small household, quite tightly in. And I don't know there was the emotional space for us to perhaps express ourselves in the way we might otherwise have done, because everything was quite intense around making sure mum was all right. And I think that's obviously had an effect on me, maybe holding things in that if I was Angela, I'd probably share more. So I do. And the other thing that is, again, I've reflected on much, much more in recent years is, and now I think I understand better, is that my dad worked in a factory, so is working on the factory floor, which is tough. Really tough, physical work. But he was skilled as a toolmaker, highly skilled. But he felt all his life disrespected. And so I could tell the conversation he hated was the conversation with people sort of standing around with a coffee or a drink and saying, well, what do you do for a living? And so I say, well, I'm a civil servant. I'm a teacher. What do you do? I work in a factory. And there'd be a moment of quiet when he said that. And then the conversation would move on. And that moment for him, I think, made him feel really disrespected, looked down. He felt people look down on him. And I think he's probably right. And for me, one of the reasons that respect is so important is that short period of silence that used to follow my dad saying what he did for a living. And that's made me, it's bound together, my mum's sort of determination with that sense of injustice that everybody should have respect and dignity.
But so much what you're saying, Kate, like we can see, like as we're listening to it, like that ties in with the fact that you go and ask the most junior member, has anyone said thank you to you and things like that. I'm interested in, why has it taken you so long to do this reflection that you can see the pieces of it that that predate it?
I don't know is the true answer to that, but as I reflect on that, I think it's because my sort of focus on outcomes. I've got to achieve this. I've got to win this case. I've got to do this. I've got to make sure that we're absolutely, if we go into court, we've got to be fully prepared. We've got to get absolutely everything right, because I have a duty to the person that I'm representing to make sure that if we possibly can, we win their case. So it's very outcome. Focus. Can we prepare it? Is every bit of preparation right? Not for me, but for the person I'm representing. There's sort of that determination, my mum, duty, my dad, hardwired together. But outcome, right? What's the next outcome? Right, with that case is done. What's the next case? Right, now we're in Northern Ireland with the Police Service of Northern Ireland. What's the outcome that we want? How do we bind this together? And then into the next phase of my life, which is running the Crown Prosecution Service, same thing. So I'm sort of running towards the outcome the whole time, almost not wanting to or thinking that I need to reflect on, what's the hard wiring here that's making you do this? I never set out on this path. I didn't know what a lawyer was, particularly when I went to Leeds to study law. I'd never met a lawyer. No experience of what being a lawyer. I was first in my family to go to university. Didn't know what a lawyer was, but sort of ploughed on towards the goal. Then through the cases, then through more strategic litigation into Northern Ireland and the Crown Prosecution Service, and into politics, the same thing, which is a deep sense, having worked 5 years running the prosecution service, that I can't bring about the change I need to bring about unless I get onto a bigger stage, which is politics, where there are better ways of bringing around a bigger outcome. But whether this was my mum or not, I don't know. But running towards the goal meant I never reflected on the journey.
Yeah.
So the questions you're asking me, this is not a conversation I would have been having 10 years ago.
Sure.
When did your parents pass away?
So my mum passed away in 2015, just a few weeks before I was elected in as an MP, which was really sad.
Yeah.
And then my dad passed away in 2018.
And as you've said, you're a different person now to the person who, particularly when your mum was still alive, in 2015, the person that would have maybe had different conversations then. We always ask at the end, what advice would you give a teenage Keir? I'm interested what you would want to say to your mum and dad if they were still here and they were able to hear you talking in this new kind of reflective, open and honest way.
I think my mum knew what I thought of her and was a very warm woman.
Yeah.
It's taken me much longer to work out my relationship with my dad because he was by nature more distant, and so bound up with how he looked after my mum, and almost a retreat from the social scene because he didn't like that question, what do you do for a living? Mm-hmm. That it was never that, it didn't feel close. And I don't regret very much in life. But the last time I saw my dad, he was in hospital, dying. And I walked away. And I knew he was going to die. I just knew it. It was end-of-life stuff anyway. I knew I wouldn't see him again. And I didn't turn around to go back and tell him what I thought. And I should have done. And that, is this advice for my teenage self? I don't know. It's hardwired advice for myself in relation to my relationship with our children. So I've tried to make sure that is completely different and that we are together, we talk and we know each other. I mean, I'm sure they'll be sitting in a podcast like this in years to come saying, God, Dad used to, insist on taking us to kickboxing or swing or whatever. And
if you had to turn back, what would you have said to your dad?
I would have said I love you. I'd have also said I'm proud of you. I'd have tried to close that gap that was so important to him in his life.
You probably knew that already, I would imagine.
I hope so.
It's so interesting, isn't it, having these types of conversations, because I think life moves at such a pace. I mean, the life you've lived especially moves at such a pace, but I think it's only often when we stop and we realise that the great moments, the hard moments, the relationships, the things that were left unsaid, like, they're all such an important part of where we're at and how we live, you know?
I agree. And I think one of the hardest things in a job where you're in the public domain is that public-private.
Yeah.
Getting the balance right is very important. And so, for example, I'm very insistent that we will always stop work at 6 o'clock on a Friday, and I will spend time with Vic, my wife, and our children. You know, most of the time arguing about what takeaway we're going to get, see if we can get them off the iPads. I get all that. But it's just, I don't want to be that bloke in 10 years that says, I wish I'd spent more time with my children. If you want to spend more time with your children, spend more time with your children. And so there's that bit of the public-private, which is really hard to get right. But I'm determined. People think that it's a sign of strong leadership or that it's busy leadership, that if you can say my diary is so full I can't see my wife and children, that is somehow a description of a good leader. I don't think so.
Yeah.
But the more intense moments are the more difficult ones. And just to give you 2 examples of this, because this is where the struggle with the public life and the private life really becomes quite acute. So when we had the leadership race for the Labour Party, my wife's mum had an awful accident and died. And as you can imagine, Vic, my wife, was in utter bits. And somehow, and I found that really hard because I was trying to reach her. This was, in many ways, for me, I'd lost my own parents, but to try to reach someone who was losing and lost hers was really hard. And to go from that to you're on stage, I could almost feel the team saying, come on, Keir, you're on. You've got to do the next hustings. You've got to go out there and, the cameras will be on, the lights will be on, and you're expected to project confidence, etc. And that's quite hard to turn around in a short period of time, taking a call just before you go on stage and then going on stage. Family and friendships are not about all the times you get together, a cup of tea and a drink. That's all good. But the real test is, are you actually there when you need to be there? This is not about, this will be the same for anybody doing a publicly facing role. The intensity of that is hard. I mean, Mark Drakeford, who's the Labour leader in Wales, lost his wife in awful, in suddenly and unexpectedly, and I can see the struggle, the struggle of dealing with something private whilst having to be in public.
So you chose to go into this public life as a politician at a relatively late age. Like you said, you'd had a rich life and successful life before it. And one of the things that I found fascinating in the books that the Obamas have done was where they've almost opened the doors into the conversations that took place before Barack Obama chose to go into public life. And he's been very explicit how his wife was quite dead against it because she could see all of these inconveniences, for want of a better term, that came your way. I'm interested in the conversations that you would have had behind closed doors with Vic, your wife, and who else was involved in that before you made that decision to go and be subject to some of these kind of experiences you've described.
Yeah, I mean, there are many conversations along the way. I mean, I think Vic would have probably preferred I didn't do it because she would know what was involved in doing it and is brilliantly supportive. I think she, if she was sitting here, she would say, "Yeah, but I know you. I knew you were going to do it anyway, and therefore, we had to talk through how you're going to do it, because she would have known that sort of focus on the outcome, focus on the goals would drive me through, and almost no holding back in a way. But I think if she were asked, she would say she'd rather I'd done something else, having finished being Director of Public Prosecutions. And then, my friends, one of my very, very good friends, and I've got really intense, strong friendships that I've had with people for a very, very long time. So, which actually helps as well, going back to the earlier discussion. So I've always got a retreat place. If I'm, if I'm being attacked, etc., I've got strong, lifelong friendships with people who know me because of who I am.
And where do they come from childhood, from school?
School, uni, playing football, that sort of thing. But two or three of them, and one of the people I've known from school, very, very good friend of mine, when I had the conversation with him about running for leader of the Labour Party, he was dead against it. He said, "What's it going to do to your family? Why do you want that life?" So he wasn't. How some people say, "Oh, what a great thing here! Fantastic! You'd be leader of the Labour Party. What a great thing to do," which it obviously is. He was against it. He just thought, this is going to, you're going to put yourself through something which isn't worth it for your family and for your life. And that's really lovely, because he was just focusing on me and not, anything wider than that.
But I guess what he doesn't have is the energy you have for wanting to enact change, or feeling like we live in a world of injustice and wanting to right that justice. It shows the strength of that even with the advice, maybe from your wife and from your good friends, like, you still decided that this was the right path. Do you ever have regrets about it?
No. And for all, we've concentrated a lot on the sort of some of the challenges of the job. It is, it is the privilege of my life to be leader of the Labour Party. You pinch myself sometimes. This is, the Labour Party is, in my view, the sort of single most important force for change that this country has ever known. If you look, I don't get too party political in this podcast, but you look at what Labour governments have done, huge achievements, the health service, equal pay, Sure Start, peace in Northern Ireland. You could go on and on and on. Incredible force for good that's changed millions of lives. And to be leading that party is an incredible privilege. And to be leading that party in the hope that we might win an election and change the country for the better is fantastic, and therefore, because we've focused on the challenges, the sense that, it's only hardship. Of course, there's all of that. That'll be there. And I readily acknowledge, by the way, that this is there for leaders in other political parties. Readily acknowledge that I think for women it's more difficult than men in leadership positions, but politics in particular. So this isn't about me or about the Labour Party, but it is an incredible privilege and opportunity. If we win that election and change millions of lives for the better, what an incredible thing to be able to do, and to restore politics as a force for good, which it can be and should be.
And where does imposter syndrome sit in your life? Because the senior leaders and the high achievers and the artists and entrepreneurs that have sat on this podcast, to a man and woman, have told us that imposter syndrome exists. What's your relationship with it?
Not very strong. I don't associate with the syndrome very much at all. I readily accept, as I did earlier, that this is not a path of predestiny for me. But I don't really. I don't have that imposter syndrome in the way that I know many people in politics and in other walks do have it to a level.
What about doubt then? Because I think, making a decision about what to have for dinner is one thing. Making a decision that could change or save or take lives, as you have to when you're at the top of politics, like, they are huge decisions. How are you a decision maker? And I'd love to find out how you come to those big decisions? When do you press the button?
Firstly, for better or for worse, I've had to make tough decisions for a while now. So it's not just as leader of the Labour Party. And one of the examples I'd give of that is when I was a lawyer, I got very involved in doing death penalty cases. So this would be representing people who are on death row, usually in countries that used to be part of the Commonwealth, that are part of the Commonwealth, used to be colonies, whether it's death by hanging. And we worked intensively in some countries in the Caribbean, and I would go out there with teams to represent some of the individuals on death row, sometimes groups of individuals. And to sit in a cell with somebody who is literally going to live or die according to whether you win the case brings into very sharp focus difficult decisions. So I know what difficult decisions are, and I know they have to be taken. You cannot have a situation where you say, well, that's too difficult, I'm going to walk away from it. That isn't leadership. That's not why you're in a leadership position. You have to take that decision. You have to be as fully informed as possible. It has to be tested. You've got to get it right. But you've got to take the decision. And if you can't take the decision, you shouldn't be in that position. And therefore, it's a necessary part of what you're doing. I've seen other people making decisions. When I was in Northern Ireland, I saw we were with the police service. I was the human rights advisor. I was in the control room when there was a dangerous situation in Northern Ireland unfolding, and there was various camera footage of someone who had got a gun and was making their way towards other people, and the fears for the worst. And I saw the senior officer going up and down with the monitors, the screens, the sound control, knowing that he had to make a decision whether to authorise the officers on the ground to use force, to use lethal force if necessary. The final decision whether to fire would be theirs, but he knew once he'd given that authorisation, that was a possible next step. And just to see and respect the decision maker. He knew what decision he had. He knew he had to make a decision. He knew he wanted to be totally informed, but he knew the consequences of his decision.
What did you learn from the way he operated in that moment?
I learned that that's how you make decisions, which is absorb, take it in, but be clear. You've got to make the decision and be clear what the consequences are. But he didn't have the luxury of shying away. Because if he shied away, that meant the person who with the gun, if they then use that gun, might kill someone. So he didn't have the luxury. If you're in a leadership position where you've got to make tough decisions, it's learning and appreciating there are tough consequences whichever way you go. So you can't just pull back. And if you want to pull back, you probably shouldn't be in the leadership position, because that's what leadership is about.
So can I ask about the end of days as a leader then? Because I'm conscious you're an Arsenal fan.
You're fast-forwarding.
Yeah. But what I mean is, like, when you spoke about when you left the CPS, that your time was up there and you made a decision to go into politics. As an Arsenal fan, you lived through the reign of Wenger, where he was an incredible leader, but those last few years were soured by people feeling that his time was up and urging him to make a decision. What have you learned about the time to walk away from a leadership role when you feel that I've done what I can do, it's time to pass over?
I think it's exactly that. I've done what I can do and I now need to go. So I felt strongly, I mean, these are the sort of steps on my journey. I felt as a lawyer I'd gone as far as I could as an individual lawyer, and I needed to change and get within an organisation. That's when I went to work with the police service in Northern Ireland. So I left behind the advocate, if you like, and got inside the organisation, bringing about change in Northern Ireland. That took me on to being Director of Public Prosecution. I mean, my time in Northern Ireland was really, really important to me because I developed a sense of changing things in a different way. Having worked 5 years as the Director of Public Prosecutions, it was the end of, you do a 5-year term. I knew I needed to move on, that I'd done what I could do and had to move on. I also felt strongly that knowing I had 5 years was important because, when you've got a big organisation, you've got probably about a year or so to get to know the organisation. You've got probably about 6 months at the end when everybody knows you're going, so your sort of influence begins to wane, and therefore you've got, for those 4 years, you've got to be punching fast and hard and getting the change you want to bring about. So knowing when you should step back and go is really important when you've gone as far as you can in the job that you're doing, is important. I think there's a different way of knowing. There's a slightly smaller version of what you've just put to me, which is really important as well, which is being able to get away from the job. Right. And get. So, I mean, this is triggered by you mentioning Arsenal. I play football every week. And
still now?
Since I'm 10, I played football. Used to be twice a week, even sometimes 3 times, but now only once.
And what's your position?
Middle of midfield on the left-hand side, shouting instructions, pretending I'm a box-to-box player. Those playing alongside me now would say that is just, a theory of the past, Keir. It's not the present anymore. But in that moment on the football pitch, nothing matters other than football. I'm playing just with mates that I've known for a long time. There's the usual banter, but the politics and the decision and the stress, I mean, it's another way of getting through this difficult. It all goes to one side as there's a single pursuit, which is put that ball in the back of the net and win. I'm not one of these people that will say, oh, it's great to take part. If I'm playing football, I'm on the pitch to win. That's the sole objective. But going to Arsenal is a different version of that because, I go now with my boy, my girl comes sometimes, I meet really close friends I've known for a long time, and we all meet, chat before the game, walk down to the game, watch the game. All of that is a sort of ritual that's to do, the actual watching the game is fantastic, but it's a small part of what this is all about, which is something that's given me great joy for all of my life. And I absolutely, it's central football to me in terms of that focus and that release. But it is it allows me space to get away from everything else that is the job. And I think that's really important. It's again why I would now say making time for my family, which sounds so such an odd thing in a way to say, is really important. Actually having that space. It's not a sign of weakness to say I want to spend time with my family. It's a sign of strength. And I think that's very important because too many people feel that as a badge of leadership, they've got to shut out their family time or their football time, whatever the equivalent of that might be. That it's a sign of weakness to say, actually, do you know what? I want to go and watch a football game. I actually disagree profoundly.
Well,
and
people
I
have
think
it as a badge of honour.
With,
I haven't got time for that.
Yeah, because I'm such a good leader that I'm so busy that I don't have time to see my children. But if there's one thing that comes out of this that I really think is important, is for me that's so wrong. That is not a badge of good leadership. I would say it's not a strength.
Now, I don't wish to be trite because you talk about something as significant as your family, but as somebody that described that you're often in absorbing mode, what have you learned from your years of watching Arsenal and elite high-performance teams that you actually think, I can translate that into my world? There's a metaphor there that lands quite well.
If I take the current Arsenal team, which I think is fantastic, I'm biased, but I do think this is an incredible group of young players. Now, I people who support other teams would say this Arsenal team at the moment is really incredible. What's incredible about them, and why is that different? What can we learn from that? For me, it's two things. One, there isn't a standout star. So when Aubameyang played for Arsenal, outstanding star, everybody tried to let everything go through him. Now we've got a team where quite often, we after the game we'll all get together again, and the inevitable conversation, well, who was player of the game? Quite often it's quite hard to say, and that is really good because the whole everybody's playing well in their positions, and that's really instructive because you're not relying on one or two standout stars. You've got a genuinely strong squad. I also think that with Arteta, you've got an incredible leader who has managed players in different ways to bring out so every player in the Arsenal squad is probably playing better than I've ever seen them play before, and better than they've played before. That's quite an extraordinary thing to bring about. And, you know, if you take the particular example of Xhaka, who stormed off the pitch, I was there, I was with my boy, and I said, he won't play for Arsenal again. And, you know, Arteta brought him around, and now you'd have him first on your team sheet pretty well every week. So that incredible leadership, probably going on, you probably wish you hadn't asked me about Arsenal now.
No, not at all.
But so it's, you know, a genuine team where everybody is doing better than they would probably do elsewhere or on their own, and incredible leadership from Arteta.
And taking people on the journey, like when I now watch Arsenal, the song at the beginning, it feels like the Emirates is together, doesn't it?
Yeah, and taking people on the journey is really, really important. The whole team needs to come on the journey with you. They will only do that, I think, if they feel that they have contributed to it. This is the thing I have about you have to have your fingerprints. You have to feel that you've influenced and this is that I'm vested in this. The whole team is vested in this. It's very important to me when I led the Crown Prosecution Service. Very important to me in the Labour Party that the team feel I'm part of this, and in order to be part of this, you have to be properly respected. And so, quite often I hope this doesn't come wrong, but I don't distinguish as to exactly where staff are in the ranking order within the organisation. Because if there's however many people in the room, I'm genuinely interested in the views of everybody in the room, whatever role they might have.
That mirrors the Arsenal team. It's not a superstar culture, it's a commitment culture.
Yeah, it's,
you're all just committing.
Yeah, and, you know, everybody will have a view and everybody should feel comfortable putting that view forward. And that's not just a sort of nice feely thing, a way to do leadership. It's the way that people then say, well, I'm coming on this journey.
Yeah.
You know, and these are journeys. I mean, we get the Labour Party from where it landed in 2019, our worst result since 1935, into being a Labour government. That would be a historic achievement, but only because so many people have played a part in it.
We're going to move on to our quickfire questions in a moment.
Before we finish
with those, I think there is one question that we have to ask you and that I think the audience would want to be asked. And the challenge here is for you, as you have done very well, actually, for the last hour or so, not to get political with your answers. We talk about taking people on the journey, right? You want the nation to go on a journey with you, commit to the Labour Party, vote you into power. If they do that, what kind of Prime Minister would be leading this country?
An inclusive, determined Prime Minister who will look out for everyone in the country.
Perfect. That was a quickfire question in many ways. We should have kept that as well. Yeah. But it only works for you.
I'm reminded, can I just do it? I'm reminded, like, you used to comment before and it reminded me of I've no doubt it'll be one of your heroes, Tony Adams.
Oh, Tony Adams, yeah.
But it was, he used that lovely quote once where he said, you can either play for the name on the shirt, where it's about yourself, you can play for the number on the shirt where I'll do what the team needs, or you play for the badge on the shirt where it doesn't matter what my role is, I'm contributing. And I was reminded of it when you spoke about trying to think of a metaphor for you joining the Labour Party, where you said it's not about the title, it's not about me, it's about the badge on the shirt and what I want to do. Are there any other heroes that you've seen at Arsenal or in your life sorry, I'll rephrase the question. Is there anybody else that you would attribute as a hero that you often try and model yourself on or compare yourself against?
The honest answer to that is no. And we often get asked as politicians, who's your hero? And this, the truth is, I haven't gone through my life sort of worshipping heroes or even identifying heroes. But there are people I respect. I mean, the trouble with football is obviously you go for the ones that Thierry Henry, what a player, you know, Bergkamp, incredible. I mean, to watch Bergkamp live was just special. If I was to pick out someone now to go to the question of leadership, and again, take on board, I'm biased, I'm an Arsenal fan through and through, etc. But Odegaard is really interesting because when he first came to Arsenal a couple of seasons ago, he was on loan at the time, I thought there's a very good player. But now he's been made captain. He's a transformed player. He's absolutely transformed. He wears the authority of being the captain on the pitch. He's involved. He's determined. he's leading the fight back, and he's keeping the team together, and he is making sure every game he goes round and thanks the fans at the end of the game. And I've seen a different Odegaard, and I've seen leadership through Odegaard this season in what I had 2 seasons ago just saw as a very technically brilliant, very, very good player. But by being given a leadership role, he has, in my view, sort of gained in authority, gained in determination, and become a very, very good on-field leader. And that matters because the reason we're doing well this season, amongst other reasons, is that when it's 2-2 or whatever at 90 minutes, we've gone on to win the game. You only do that with that special resilience that you get with leadership on the pitch.
Very good. Right, ready for the dreaded quickfire questions?
That wasn't a very quickfire answer, was it?
No.
First of all, what are the 3 non-negotiable behaviours that you and the people around you would ideally buy into?
The first is be there. You've got to be there. This is a guttural thing for me. Just describing earlier. If this is particularly obviously people close to me, but you've got to be there. Yeah. All the rest of it is as naught compared to being there, and that just to translate that into leadership very briefly. I know this is quick fire, but I felt this when I was leading the Crown Prosecution Service. Certainly feel it as leader of the Labour Party. As leader, you get the plaudits. So if the Crown Prosecution Service did a fantastic job, we had some incredible prosecutions of major terrorist cases, and sometimes there were sort of awards, international awards, for the way in which we'd done the case. There was one terrible plot to try and bring down a number of aeroplanes at the same time across the Atlantic, which got thwarted and prosecuted. And my job was to receive the award on behalf of the organisation. But that comes with the be there bit, which is when things go wrong, you carry the can. And you carry the can for the whole organisation, and you take responsibility. You don't go casting around for other people. So be there is a personal thing for me with friends and family, which is the test isn't whether you're phoning every day. The test is whether you're there when the chips are down and you really need to be there. But there's a bit of leadership in that. The second would be don't bullshit. I can't stand bullshit.
Agreed.
It just does my head in, and there's too much of it around. And I suppose the third would be respect. You've got to respect everybody in the team. I think that'd be my 3 non-negotiables.
What's your greatest strength and your biggest weakness?
Strength, I suppose, is resilience and focus. Just being able to see what I'm trying to achieve and go for it, and not be knocked off. Almost whatever you're trying to achieve in life. There's many reasons why you're going to get knocked off course, but you've got to be utterly focused on it. In terms of weakness, I think the undersharing is a weakness, and I think probably the time taken to really get to trust someone is a weakness, certainly frustration. There are probably many others, but I'd say they were definitely weaknesses.
What is the thing that you feel people get wrong most often or misunderstand most about you?
Some people think that the lack of sort of extrovert passion means that there isn't a massive, deep passion to get things done and to get things changed. People say, well, I've heard so-and-so speak eloquently about this issue and they seem so passionate about it. And that is often true. But my response to that is I've heard so many people speak passionately about a problem, brilliantly about a problem, but I'm passionate about solving it. I don't want to keep describing the same problem over and over again. I know what the problem is. The passion I've got is I need to change, I need to solve that. And that's the sort of inner, determined passion that isn't always carried in the same way as the sort of articulate expression of what the problem is. And I think some people feel that because I'm not, passionately describing the problem, that somehow there isn't the inner passion to fix the fundamentals. And they're totally, totally wrong about that. And I think anybody who works with me knows that. And I think that's what Anne Trainer was trying to get at when she was saying what she said about oversharing and undersharing.
If you could go back to one moment of your life, what would it be and why?
I think we've probably touched on it. It would probably be to walk back in on my dad. If I could take a second moment, one of the things that was a feature of my mum being very ill towards the end of her life, when she couldn't speak and couldn't really move, was that our children never got to know her. So if somehow I could take them back to see a version of her when she was at her best, I'd love to do that, because they never really knew her. This was not her fault or theirs. They were just young and she couldn't speak at that stage. She couldn't feed herself or anything. And so all they knew was somebody who was, very unable to do things. And I would have loved them to have known what she was really like, was this amazingly courageous, determined, funny, warm mum.
What was her name?
Jo.
Jo. She sounds amazing.
If I could just take them back so they could meet my mum at her best, or, would be an amazingly uplifting moment and give them something that, in a sense, they don't really have now.
Very nice. We have a high performance book club with many members. They love discussing books that have changed the game for them, and they love recommendations. So if we were to ask you, in the high performance spirit, one book to recommend to our book club, what would you like them to read and why?
I don't know. I can't remember the name of this book, but there was one book I was really taken by, which was a book about high-performing sports people. I will remember this. And it was when they were born, and it was this analysis that showed that very many top-flight footballers are born in the 6 months after September. I can't remember the name.
Sports Gene by David Epstein.
Either that, or I think there's another version. It was about why is it that most top-class footballers, top-flight footballers, were born in the sort of 3 or 6 months after September.
That's right, yeah.
And the answer are all about how quickly your brain develops, physically you develop, and then how you're pulled on through, because you're, by the age of 6 or 8, better than your classmates because you're slightly bigger, you're stronger, you're thinking a little bit more quickly than at that stage someone who's the best part of a year behind you. And then fascinatingly in this book was the version of that from America, where the school year is different, and basketball players, and it was the insight was not so much within the first, if you're nearly a year older than those around you when you're 6 or 7, you are probably going to be a bit more developed.
Malcolm Gladwell book, isn't it?
Yeah, but it was also the fact that then what that leads to is the pulling out, the helping, the extra skills, the pushing forward, and so that then sort of snowballs into something. And so there's a version of that in sport and also in life, as to understanding how these things sort of feed off each other, I suppose. I found absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I know the one you mean. It was a Gladwell book.
Yeah,
you shared it first time. I'd seen those stats.
Yeah,
not Outliers.
Outliers, I think it is. Yeah.
That was it. Yeah, that was a great book.
Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, right? That's book.
It. Yeah,
that's the book. Very good.
Okay. Are we asking the day in the life question?
Yeah, we could do that. For Plus,
so we have our Plus listeners, Keir, and what we would be really interested to hear about is, what's a typical day in your life like?
The answer is there aren't that many typical days, because they change a lot. But they split into 2 parts really. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is normally in and around Parliament. The rest of the week and weekend is away from Parliament in different parts of the country. So it falls into different parts like that. And it can really vary. But if I'm on the road, say the second half of the week, it'll often be up very early to do a media round, which are sort of doing 4 or 5, 6 interviews early on. possibly doing so if we take next week, on Thursday, I'll be doing a media round in the morning. I'll then be up on stage giving a speech, then dealing with more media. Then we've got meetings following on from that, and then going to a different part of the country to prepare to do a version of the same the next day. So there's sort of constant movement. On a Parliament day, it's into Parliament, meetings, media, shadow cabinet. I mean, it's just back-to-back meetings nearly all the time.
And as somebody that's got an aversion to meetings, like how do you stay fresh in them that you can go in there and achieve your objective without getting jaded or frustrated?
I think because each meeting's different group of people, but it's what are you trying to achieve in this meeting, and not having a meeting for the sake of it. Right. What are we actually achieving here? And what do we need to get out of this meeting? And not having too much around the edges of that is really, really important. Very important to me, if it's possible to do it, is to see my kids in the morning or the evening. So that'll be the highlight. And the usual brilliance of that.
How old are they?
So our boy is 14 and a half, and our girl is 12, and just 2 or 3 brilliant vignettes of what that's like, because this is such a leveller. It's such a good thing to be brought completely down to earth by your children. And so our boy will come down the stairs shortly after 7 most mornings with about halfway down the stairs, "All right, Dad." That's yeah. Our girl will come down. She has got brilliant sort of put downs for me. So this was a couple of years ago now. She asked me in the morning, "What time are you home tonight, Daddy?" And I said, "I'll be late." "What are you doing?" "I'm doing a fundraising dinner." "Oh, what's that?" "Oh, it's a dinner where people pay to hear someone speak." "Who's speaking?"
I can see
me. "Why would anyone pay to hear you speak?" It was like
That's what kids are there for.
It was a slow motion. Now she would do it as a tease, but then it was the sort of incredulous question of whatever it was, 8 or 9 year old.
Keep your feet on the ground.
Well, and then the other one was the last year I won the Spectator Parliamentarian of the Year award, which was really great. And yes, in a frame, and sort of took it home. And our boy was on the settee watching television as I arrived home about sort of 9:30, and I showed him, and he just handed it back to me. But if I can try and describe this, almost without taking his eyes off the telly, saying, "How did you blag that then?" And it was so good to be reduced to,
yeah, I get that,
to Dad as he walks through the door. It is fantastically important.
Absolutely. Final question, Keir, is really your last message to leave people with, something ringing in their ears, your golden rule, if you like, to living a high performance life.
If you have that feeling in the back of your mind that somehow the thing you want to do or achieve is not for you, knock that thought out of your mind. I say this to school children a lot, because I think one of the biggest inhibitors, one of the biggest things that holds back aspiration, is that thing that somehow says to some young people, as it did to me, that thing that you might want to do isn't really for someone like you. Get that out of your mind. And once that's out of your mind, you can go a long way.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for the last hour and a bit. I think if nothing else, we've proven Angela wrong now. You're no longer an undersharer. That was an insight that I certainly have never seen before, to you and the way you think and the way you've lived and the experiences you've had. And people can't vote for someone that they don't know. So I think this opportunity for people to get to know you is just really valuable for the people of the country. So thank you very much for the time.
Been a privilege.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hey guys, it's Jake here. Listen, before you go, please do me just one favour. Hit subscribe. It makes such a difference to us. The more subscribers we get, then the bigger the channel becomes. The bigger the channel becomes, the bigger the names we can attract and the more impact we can have for you. So thanks for watching, and please subscribe right now.